Have you ever wondered what happens when a brilliant yet controversial mind ventures into territories society prefers to keep hidden? Today, we'll unravel one of the most fascinating and long-hidden enigmas associated with a figure who evokes both fascination and repulsion, Aleister Crowley. We're not just talking about his fame as the wickedest man in the world, a self-proclaimed title he embraced with a certain theatrical relish. Nor will we focus on his esoteric rituals, his poetry, or his complex philosophies, which alone would be material for countless explorations. What attracts us today is a specific teaching, a facet of his vast work that for decades was carefully veiled, accessible only to a select circle, and often misunderstood or distorted when touched upon by the general public. Imagine a knowledge that, if applied correctly, could catalyze profound transformations in human consciousness, but which, in the wrong hands or without proper preparation, could lead to disorientation or even self-destruction. It is this forbidden teaching, this knowledge that required rigorous preparation and intimate understanding, that our investigation will focus on. This is not black magic in the popular sense, nor mere occult tricks. It is something more subtle, more intrinsic to the very nature of existence and perception. Crowley, with his penetrating intelligence and colossal ego, dedicated his life to exploring the limits of human experience, both physical and spiritual. He believed he had discovered keys to unlocking latent potential in the human psyche, pathways to radical self-transformation that transcended the moral and religious conventions of his time. But as a master alchemist who held the secret of transmutation, he knew that certain truths could not simply be cast to the wind. They were like seeds that, planted in infertile soil or by inexperienced hands, would never germinate, or worse, would rot. What he called the great work, the quest for union with the divine and the fulfillment of one's true will, contained elements he considered too dangerous to be democratized without proper guidance. He saw the majority of humanity as black magicians, people trapped in selfish desires and blind to life's true purpose. Therefore, the most advanced teachings, those that touched on the direct manipulation of subtle energies and the restructuring of one's inner reality, were transmitted only under oath, in controlled environments, and to those who demonstrated an unwavering commitment to self-knowledge and discipline. The goal was not simply personal power, but the transcendence of the ego and the manifestation of inner divinity. However, the very nature of these teachings, their potential to redefine perception and will, caused them, over time, to be neglected by many of their less dedicated followers and, more significantly, deliberately minimized or misinterpreted by those who feared their power or failed to grasp their depth. Our journey today is not intended to glorify Crowley, nor to demystify the entirety of his work, which is vast and complex. Our focus is specific, to unearth, within his legacy, what he himself considered to be the pinnacle of his practical teachings, the part he most carefully retained. This teaching, which permeates his writings in an enigmatic and often coded form, is not an invitation to irresponsible experimentation. On the contrary, it is a radical proposal for self-mastery, a technique that promises, in his own words, to know and master one's own destiny. The complexity lies not only in the doctrine itself, but in the way it was presented, and crucially, how it was subjected to a period of self-imposed silence and obscurity by Crowley and his immediate successors. Understanding why this knowledge was kept and why it still resonates with such potent transformative potential is the core of our exploration. Prepare to be immersed in a topic that challenges common perceptions of power, consciousness and human potential, a topic that, by its very nature, has remained hidden between the lines of history for far too long. The nature of this occult teaching, which we will call the artifice of conscious will, lies in its ability to dismantle the illusion of linear causality and the determinism imposed by common perception. Crowley argued that the vast majority of people live under the yoke of external and internal forces they barely perceive, believing they are acting of free will, when in fact they are mere automatons responding to stimuli. The artifice proposes a fundamental reorientation, the understanding that will, not mere ephemeral desire, but the directing force of the being, is the primary driver of reality. What has been hidden is not the existence of will, but rather the methodology for its deliberate and conscious application, free from the shackles of ego and social conditioning. Think of it like learning to drive a self-driving car, but with the crucial difference that you are developing the ability to reprogram the system's software itself, not simply setting a destination. The techniques involved a grueling discipline of self-observation, the identification and deactivation of psychic residue, inherited or acquired patterns of thought and emotion that obscure the clarity of the will, and, finally, the focused projection of this transmuted will into events. This process was neither quick nor easy. It required years of dedicated practice, often in isolation, away from the distractions and influences that might derail the aspirant. Crowley understood that mere theory about will would be futile. What he sought to teach, and which was kept secret, were the mechanisms for accessing and channeling this force. One of these central mechanisms, taught only in private sessions and under direct supervision, involved the technique of dissolution of the mental form. Essentially, it was a process of deep meditation and active visualization, aimed at deconstructing the rigid mental images the mind creates to organize itself and interact with the world. These images, while useful for everyday life, function as barriers, limiting the flexibility of consciousness and, consequently, the effectiveness of will. By learning to undo these forms, the practitioner gained the ability to reshape their own inner reality, becoming an active agent in the creation of their experience, rather than a passive recipient. Imagine a sculptor who, instead of working a predefined block of marble, learns to shape the very raw material of consciousness. This was the promise of the artifice. Rigorous practice of this technique allowed the individual to transcend the perceived limitations of his or her own existence, paving the way for the manifestation of potentials that previously seemed impossible. The most forbidden, and therefore most carefully guarded, aspect of the artifice of conscious will resided in the techniques of subtle intervention. These were not spells or invocations in the popular mystical sense, but rather a profound understanding of energetic resonance. Crowley postulated that every thought, every emotion, every act of will generates a specific vibration in the subtle fabric of reality. The hidden secret was how to modulate this vibration with surgical precision to influence events, people, or circumstances, not coercively, but through harmonious attunement. This involved absolute control over one's inner state, the ability to maintain unwavering focus and absolute clarity of intention, without the ego interfering with its secondary desires or fears. An example would be the ability, through a state of deep focused contemplation, to create a subtle cloud of influence around a desired goal, attracting favorable circumstances without direct force or manipulation. This ability, by its nature, required a level of self-discipline and self-knowledge that the vast majority of people lacked. The temptation to use such power for selfish ends was immense, and Crowley knew that, Without adequate ethical and spiritual preparation, such practices could lead to the practitioner's own ruin, further imprisoning them in cycles of negative cause and effect. Therefore, this layer of teaching was reserved for the most advanced disciples, those who had already undergone extensive processes of purification and self-mastery and who understood the responsibility inherent in such knowledge. We delve deeper into the artwork of conscious will. We discover that one of the least understood, and therefore least openly taught, pillars was the practical application of the law of psychic resonance. This law, which Crowley explored in detail in his less accessible texts, is not about attracting material objects or frivolously influencing events. It is fundamentally about how the individual's own psychic structure resonates with the energies and patterns of the universe. What was kept secret were the specific techniques for fine-tuning this resonance, for harmonizing the inner self with the energetic threads that connect all things. Imagine that the universe is a vast cosmic symphony, and each being is an instrument. Most people play out of tune, producing cacophony and attracting dissonant patterns into their lives. The forbidden teaching, in this sense, was the method for learning to play in harmony with the universal orchestra, not to control it, but to participate in its melody in a cohesive and constructive way. This required a state of absolute calm and clarity of mind, free from all anxiety and selfish desire that obscure the perception of true harmony. The next level of depth in this occult teaching concerns the transmutation of existential fear. Crowley observed that most human suffering stems from primordial fears: the fear of death, the fear of loneliness, the fear of the unknown. These fears, he argued, are the primary force preventing the full manifestation of the will and consequent enlightenment. The techniques for dealing with them were intense and often shocking to the uninitiated. It was not a matter of repressing fear, but rather of confronting it at its deepest root, of facing it directly in altered states of consciousness induced by rigorous meditative practices and, in some cases, through substances that, under strict supervision, could temporarily dilute the barriers of ordinary perception. The idea was to demonstrate experimentally that fear is ultimately a mental construct, a reaction to a perceived danger that, when stripped of its emotional and conceptual associations, loses its paralyzing power. By dismantling this structure of fear, the practitioner freed themselves to act with unwavering courage and clarity, allowing authentic will to emerge without the veil of apprehension. Furthermore, a particularly sensitive aspect of the teaching that remained obscured was the geometry of manifest consciousness. Crowley believed that physical reality is merely the projection of energetic and archetypal patterns onto a denser plane of existence. Based on studies of sacred geometry and ancient symbolism, he developed methods for visualizing and drawing these patterns into the ether, thus influencing how energy condenses to create reality. This was not like drawing shapes on paper. It was an active and focused mental projection, where the practitioner learned to feel and shape abstract space before it became material. Imagine an architect who doesn't build houses with bricks and mortar, but who, through his vision and intention, shapes the very fabric of space before physical matter is even summoned. The techniques involved a deep understanding of symbols, colors, and resonant sounds, used as tools to influence energetic flows. This knowledge was transmitted gradually, ensuring that the aspirant first mastered self-control over his own mind before attempting to influence external reality, as inner disharmony would invariably be reflected in chaotic distortions in the outer world. Finally, we consider the direct implication of artifice in the art of shadow integration. For Crowley, The shadow was not merely the dark side of the psyche, but the reservoir of latent potentials, repressed energies, and aspects of the self that society and the individual themselves had rejected or categorized as undesirable. The forbidden teaching included methods for recognizing, accepting, and crucially, reintegrating these energies. This was vital because the fragmentation of the psyche, caused by the denial of parts of oneself, weakened the will and created internal conflicts that sabotaged any attempt at self-transformation. Shadow integration did not mean embracing destructive behaviors, but rather understanding the energy behind these behaviors and channeling it constructively. A person experiencing intense anger, for example, learned not to suppress that anger, but to understand its fundamental nature, the energy of power, protection, or the pursuit of justice, and to use it as fuel for creative and assertive, rather than destructive, actions. This process, which required brutal honesty with oneself and a profound detachment from social judgment, was the final step toward the unification of being and the full manifestation of the will. An additional and often overlooked layer of Aleister Crowley's teaching, which contributed to its forbidden status, concerns the synchronization of will with the universal flow. Contrary to the idea of imposing one's will upon reality, this advanced technique focused on becoming a conduit for cosmic energy in motion, allowing individual will to manifest through intuitive alignment with events already unfolding. This required a state of hyper-awareness where the practitioner could feel the underlying currents of causality and position themselves to maximize the impact of their actions. Like a surfer riding a wave rather than trying to create it, what was kept secret was not the force of will itself, but rather the subtlety of its application, where the most effective actions seemed minimal, yet perfectly timed. Think of how a skilled gardener doesn't force a plant to grow, but creates the ideal conditions, soil, light, water, for it to flourish at its own pace and rhythm. Similarly, the teachings taught how to cultivate the ideal conditions for the manifestation of will, interacting with existing energies rather than opposing them. This approach minimized resistance and maximized efficiency, making manifestation more organic and less prone to adverse reactions from the universe. Furthermore, a practical component rarely discussed openly involved the awakening of dormant power centers, which went beyond simple chakra activation. Crowley described, in cryptic passages, the existence of energetic portals within the psychic structure that, when opened and harmonized, allowed unprecedented access to vital energy and profound intuition. These techniques were extremely delicate, requiring not only physical and mental discipline, but also a profound understanding of subtle anatomy. The danger lay in the possibility of psychic short circuits, or the uncontrolled activation of these energies, which could lead to states of severe mental disorientation or the manifestation of chaotic energies. Therefore, instruction was tightly controlled, focusing on the gradual and safe integration of these new insights and powers. Now consider how this applies when you face a challenge, where brute force or logical argumentation seem insufficient. The teaching suggested the possibility of accessing previously unexplored inner resources, allowing an unexpected solution to emerge naturally from an expanded state of consciousness. Another element of profound importance, which contributed to the secrecy surrounding certain Crowleyan teachings, was the application of the magic of the spoken word and the creative word. Crowley wasn't referring to simple incantations or positive affirmations. His approach involved an understanding of the vibrational frequencies intrinsic to language, and how the precise articulation of certain sound combinations, often in ancient languages or with specific intonation patterns, could directly affect the energetic environment. What was guarded was the methodology for achieving a state of creative word, where the spoken word was not just an expression, but an act of creation itself. This required perfect unity between thought, intention, and pronunciation, so that the energy released by the voice would resonate with the desired frequency in the field of manifestation. Imagine the difference between an amateur musician playing a symphony with wrong notes and an experienced conductor who, with a single gesture, evokes perfect harmony from the entire orchestra. Likewise, the teaching taught how to tune one's voice to the music of the spheres, allowing for a subtle yet profound influence on reality. Consequently, the study and practice of the art of voluntary identity dissociation became a landmark in more esoteric circles. This advanced technique allowed the practitioner, under absolute control, to momentarily detach from their habitual ego identity. The goal was not alienation, but rather the attainment of an objective perspective, free from the shackles of personal attachment and conditioning. By observing themselves and the world from this detached perspective, the practitioner gained unparalleled clarity about the true dynamics at play, enabling wiser and more strategic decision-making. What was kept secret were the safe methods for achieving this dissociation, ensuring that the practitioner could always return to their full identity without leaving any residue of fragmentation or confusion. This skill was crucial to the effective application of will, as the ego, with its emotions and biases, often obscures the most direct and effective path. Therefore, the ability to rise above the limited perspective of the I was a prerequisite for true mastery. Finally, a particularly delicate aspect of Crowley's legacy, often underestimated or misinterpreted, concerned the creation and manipulation of fields of subtle influence. Going beyond mere personal intention, this practice involved learning how to weave and project specific energetic patterns, not to coerce or dominate, but to create an environment conducive to the manifestation of a desired outcome. This was similar to how a scientist creates a controlled magnetic field to orient particles, but applied to the psychic and energetic realm. The key was precision in modulating vibrations, constancy in maintaining the field, and, crucially, the absence of egoic interference. Crowley taught that a poorly constructed field of influence or maintained by impure will could have the opposite effect, attracting unwanted circumstances or saturating the practitioner with the energy they sought to manipulate. Therefore, this technique was reserved for those who demonstrated an exceptional level of self-discipline and purity of purpose, enabling them to plant energetic seeds that would blossom harmoniously into the fabric of reality without forcing or distorting the natural flow of things. As we weave together the threads that emerged from previous explorations, a new landscape of understanding begins to emerge. We realize that what initially seemed like a set of isolated esoteric practices reveals itself, upon closer scrutiny, as an integrated system of self-transformation, where each element resonates with and amplifies the others. This journey through concepts that, by their very nature, required a veil of discretion, has led us down a path where mere initial curiosity gives way to a deeper appreciation of the complexity and depth of human potential. Reflecting on this trajectory, it becomes clear that the true strength of the teaching lies not in arcane secrets, but in the intrinsic discipline and inner alchemy it proposes. The various facets we explore, from the recalibration of perception to the subtle art of energetic influence, converge on a central point: the radical redefinition of the individual's relationship with themselves and the universe around them. This convergence suggests that what was hidden was not so much the what, but the how, not the possibility itself, but the precise methodology for its safe and effective manifestation, requiring a constant refinement of consciousness. As we approach the conclusion, the understanding that solidifies is that the legacy in question offers a perspective on existence that transcends superficial dichotomies. The tools and insights discussed, while powerful, point to a mastery that manifests in harmony, fluidity, and integration, rather than imposition or control in the crudest sense. It is as if, along this journey, we have unraveled the mechanisms of an intricate cosmic clock, understanding not only its gears but the symphony they produce when perfectly synchronized. Ultimate enlightenment, therefore, lies not in the possession of isolated knowledge, but in the wisdom of its application and the continuous transformation it catalyzes. The implications of this body of knowledge, when viewed in its interconnected totality, paint a fascinating picture of the inherent capacity to shape one's inner reality and, consequently, influence external experience. What might once have seemed disparate techniques now appear as components of a map for self-mastery and the full expression of potential. This expanded vision prepares us to contemplate the broader resonances of this knowledge, paving the way for a final consideration of its place in our understanding of what it means to be fully human, conscious and active in our own existence, ultimately exploring Aleister Crowley's forbidden teaching, the one that for so long remained veiled and shrouded in mystery, does not leave us with a spellbook or a guide to domination. Rather, it reveals the profound and ongoing journey of self-knowledge and self-transformation that every human being is capable of undertaking. What was once knowledge, restricted to select circles, now presents itself not as a treasure to be coveted, but as an invitation to unravel one's own inner mysteries. The true essence of this legacy lies not in the attainment of external powers, but in the radical reintegration of the individual with themselves, in the courage to confront inner shadows, and in the discipline to harmonize one's will with the deeper currents of existence. The practice, the true alchemical work, begins now, in the silence of one's own consciousness, in the full acceptance of one's capacity to be the author and agent of one's reality. The wisdom that emerges from this immersion is not a point of arrival, but an ever-expanding horizon. Every technique, every concept, every teaching deliberately preserved by Crowley points to the same fundamental truth. The key to unlocking human potential lies in understanding and consciously managing the energies that compose and surround us. It is not about imposing an external will on the world, but about cultivating an inner will, pure and focused, capable of resonating with the very fabric of reality. This resonance, this harmony, is the true power that has been hidden from us, not out of malice, but out of a profound understanding that its manifestation requires ethical preparation and a clarity of purpose that only the individual truly dedicated to their own evolution can achieve. Thus, the forbidden teaching reveals itself as a mirror, reflecting back to us the magnificence and responsibility inherent in our own existence. Crowley's legacy, seen in this light, compels us to move beyond the superficiality of the controversies surrounding him. He invites us to contemplate the possibility that the greatest powers reside not in external forces, but in the mastery of internal energies. Discipline, clarity of intention, and the courage to face the unknown are the tools that, when applied with wisdom and integrity, allow us not only to understand, but to actively participate in the cosmic dance of creation. What has been kept secret, ultimately, is the very ability to awaken to the fullness of our being, to recognize that the deepest magic lies not in manipulating the world, but in transmuting ourselves. May this exploration serve as a catalyst, a reminder that the true pursuit of knowledge is an ongoing journey of self-discovery, and that the most transformative power lies within those who dare to look within.